and welcome. I am Lindsay-Rae McIntyre, Chief Diversity Officer for Microsoft. Thanks so much for joining us today. At Microsoft, over the past couple of years, we've had the privilege of learning from some of the world's leading experts and academics on key diversity and inclusion topics. These experts are driving critical work, each in their own way, for communities and organizations around the world. As a Chief Diversity Officer, I know this space is always evolving. New conversations, deeper understanding of identity, and greater connections to communities surface every day. Staying on top of this evolution is part of what my team does to ensure we are always innovating for inclusion. Today, I thought I'd share with you insights from just a few experts we've had the pleasure of learning from. We hope their perspectives help spark new ways of thinking about diversity and inclusion for your organization or for your individual learning journey. Collectively, this allows us to create more inclusive culture on our teams, for everyone here at Microsoft, and for our ecosystem. We share more from these and many others on our Inclusion Journey site at aka.ms/inclusion journey. Our list of top 5 insights. Let's start with allyship. At Microsoft, we connect our growth mindset culture to diversity and inclusion through a unique approach to allyship. We know an ally is not a person's identity, but a set of intentional actions. As we build our awareness in service of being able to better practice allyship, we're going to need to continue learning because we're not always going to get it right. Allyship is not a thing we do once in a meeting or weekly on that particular call. It's a long-term commitment, one that requires self-awareness, a willingness to keep trying, even when we make mistakes. To do something well, we have to know what it is and what it isn't. So the first key learning I'll share with you is that it's critical to know the difference between effective allyship and ineffective allyship before we act. Dolly Chugh, psychologist, author, and professor at New York University, has a provocative way of describing what ineffective allyship can look like.
Dolly, what does ineffective allyship look like, and how can it go wrong?
I have so many examples of that from my own grappling and learning process. I'd say one pattern is ineffective allyship has a lot of cookie seeking in it. This is a term that activists use to describe the tendency that we all have. It's a very human tendency that we want to be kind of stroked or appreciated or pat on the back for our good deeds. I've interviewed a bunch of people for my book, and in one of the interviews, somebody shared with me a story. Rachel Herniak shared a story of after the Orlando Pulse shooting. She woke up, learned the news. As a queer woman, she was absolutely mortified, terrified. And then as the day moved to Sunday evening and she started thinking about going to work the next day, she dreaded it. And it wasn't because she didn't have supportive friends and colleagues at work. It was actually because she imagined there would be a lot of cookie seeking, a lot of people coming in expressing their concern and their mortification, and then telling her about the donations they make to the Trevor Project or the roommate they have that recently came out. In other words, they would be looking for validation from her. That's what the cookie seeking is, rather than seeking to create space for her and centering her. So that's a big mistake we make, is that we begin the lifelong work of learning and acting as allies, and then we want to be, in that very human way we all have, praised for it.
I love that phrase, cookie seeking. It forces us to stop and reflect on our own motivations for allyship. When is it for our own purposes versus when is it truly for the benefit of others? Allyship starts with the work to deepen our own individual awareness. But our vision for change has got to be even bigger than that. Our next topic is systemic change. As those who envision and create the future of technology, it's in our shared interest to challenge our own assumptions and systemic status quo on our teams and inside our organizations. By asking ourselves, How can we do things differently to create an opening, invite more perspectives and voices into spaces where we're innovating? The second learning I'll share is that it takes honest reflection on the individual level and the organizational level to drive systemic change. Chase Strangio, a lawyer with the ACLU and LGBTQIA+ rights activist, challenges us to reflect on our own biases that can influence both our behaviors and the policies and practices we create.
We have to break down the assumptions of how workplaces and institutions are organized, whether that's in terms of thinking about, well, who takes on caretaking labor in the home and how is that implicated in the workplace? Who takes on caretaking labor in the workplace and how is that organized? Who's cleaning up after meetings? Who's making space for others to speak in meetings. There's all sorts of ways in which the workplace has been constituted in the United States and around the world that has benefited cisgender, heterosexual white men to the exclusion of and pushing people all the way out of the workplace. And so if we want to be more inclusive, we have to challenge all of our practices, whether those are family leave practices, practices around restrooms, practices around access to healthcare, practices around the language that we use when we're interviewing people. Do we assume their pronouns? Do we assume that they use the name that's the name on their legal documentation? Do we assume the pronouns and sex of their partner? Do we assume that they are not caring for children or family members at home? I think in order to sort of maximize the capaciousness that we all hold and have our workplaces be the most efficient, be the most profitable, be the most exciting, that we have to sort of break down all of the structural and interpersonal assumptions about gender that we are bringing.
Now, you're a lawyer, obviously, and there are frameworks that you bring in terms of making those challenges in a workplace such as, say, at Microsoft or any other company. What would be your best advice in terms of bringing those challenges to a conversation?
I mean, I really, for me, it's about having the conversation. It's about getting to know people. I talk a lot about how when I interviewed at my current job at the ACLU, I later learned that people in my interview assumed that I wouldn't be taken seriously by a judge or that I wouldn't be able to thrive in the environment because I sort of transcended the binary of maleness and femaleness, which can make people uncomfortable. But if we assume that people aren't going to be able to enter and improve our workspaces, then we're going to push out incredible talent. And so I think having conversations with people and sort of asking people sort of, why is it that you feel most comfortable with this type of candidate? Why is it that you're afraid to have someone in the workplace who's going to challenge the structure of the layout, whether it's the bathrooms, whether it's the healthcare plan, whether it's the time of day that someone has to leave to get their kids? These are all conversations that we have to have with each other. And I think the more people that you bring in with direct experience living at the sort of cross lines of systemic oppression, the more that you are going to be able to have those conversations at all levels of leadership. If everyone who is, dissimilar to the people who are at the top of any hierarchy is completely pushed out of an institution, that institution will never change, and we will never be able to see the type of progress that we need.
Have we considered, why is it that we feel most comfortable with this particular type of candidate? Chase does a great job of challenging us to get out of our comfort zones and to ask ourselves, are we doing what is easy? Or are we doing what is right? It is a question that can help us move beyond the binary in our thinking about gender in the workplace and can help us think about employee experience differently for all. Our next topic is about embracing identity. Our family identities intersect powerfully with all of our other identities. And we may not think about family identity as something to prioritize for inclusion, but in the ways that our society is evolving, embracing families in all forms can help every employee thrive. So the third key learning I want to share with you is that when employees don't have to hide parts of their identity at work, they can thrive individually and collectively. I want to share just some of the transformative thinking from Rebecca Walker, best-selling author, producer, and activist. She speaks to how organizations can dismantle non-inclusive systems and how we can all create more expansive ways to better support the full spectrum of families.
I have been asking the question, what is a family, in a very lived, direct way for many, many years since my birth. And so, that experience caused me to ask deep questions. What does it mean to be a family? What does it mean to be a part of a family that is not accepted as a normal family in this culture? How can I use my voice and my sensibility and my platform, my access, to broaden our understanding of what families are, what they do, how they identify, to make space for those voices. So that was the primal kind of urge, the initial urge. And then also I was seeing around me in my cohort so many different kinds of families, happening. One of my dear friends had a family member who was incarcerated. Another dear friend decided to give his sperm to his best friend so that she could have a child, even though he didn't want to be a traditional father to that child. I thought a lot about single mothers by choice, women who had decided they were not going to wait for someone to come and sort of sweep them off their feet and have a child, that they were going to really actively pursue their dream of having a child. And I was struck by this incredible evolution in our definition of what it means to be a family.
What can be done at the individual, at the organizational level, to make teams and companies more inclusive of all families? Like you said, to not have the next so-and-so, but the new, original, emerging voices that are going to move our companies forward. Well,
obviously, it's very important that recruitment, that when the company is thinking about bringing in new voices at every level, that these are top of mind concerns. So hiring, recruitment, in-house network, in-house development of people who are coming from different backgrounds, family backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, ideological backgrounds. How do we do that? I think that's really, really important. I think that conversations like this are critical. The idea of educating, the community and really creating space for people to learn about different points of view, then thinking about how to put those into action systemically. This is very, very important work, So obviously when we think about, the corporate, you've got the inside, you've got the corporate culture where people show up every day. So that's the place where you want to be changing the language, changing the tone, making people feel more and more comfortable showing up as who they are. Because if they cannot show up as who they are, acknowledging, listen, this kid is sick, my mother is in the hospital, my wife, my husband, my non-binary partner is undergoing surgery for this, is being my kids having a crisis in school because they have a learning difference. My great whoever is struggling with a mental health issue because we are not respecting neurodiversity in the way that we should. These are the kinds of things people need to be able to say in the workplace, right? They need to just be able to say it. This is what's really going on for me. And so companies need to do whatever they can internally to do that. So obviously there are things like, extended paid parental leave that we need to be thinking about. Obviously flex time for parents. Obviously one of my greatest wishes is on-site daycare for children. These are things that have been in the conversation for a very long time. I also think in terms of asking people what they really need to get more support for their families. I think about possibly providing legal advice to team members who may be having difficulties in different realms. It could be an incarcerated spouse. It could be someone who's trying to seek asylum from another country. It could be someone who needs immigration support, whose child has DACA, and they don't know what's going to happen. What are the things that people actually need to have healthy families, and what can the company provide?
Many of us have had to come to terms these last couple of years with an important truth. No matter how hard we might try, we can't leave parts of ourselves at the door when we come to work each day. Then why would we expect our colleagues and employees to do so? Rebecca breaks open some of the traditional thinking about what a family is, to push us to be even more thoughtful about how we include everyone in our workplace. Many people are quick to name a community or an identity that they aren't a member of, but that they feel they deeply understand. We strive to get there, either through intentional proximity or building individual empathy. These are important steps, of course. But we also have to have accountability to broaden our awareness about the collective global histories of communities outside of our own. Only then can we connect to the realities of inequality in the systems we create and the impact they have on others. This is the fourth key learning I want to share. A true ally commits to learning about the historical, social, and cultural context of a community we strive to support. Dr. G. Christina Mora, professor at UC Berkeley, explains why understanding these complex and nuanced global histories is integral to creating workplace cultures inclusive of Hispanic and Latinx communities.
How can we be more inclusive of the Hispanic and Latinx communities from a global point of view as opposed to just merely from the United States?
Latin American migration to the United States is not by accident. It is linked to, centuries of a specific relationship between the United States and countries south of the U.S.-Mexico border. It is linked to a history of global inequality. It is linked to wars. It is linked to, global trends. Latin American migration, even now, that you see present here in the United States, is also linked to global climate crises, right? Folks leaving Nicaragua after Hurricane Mitch, folks leaving Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, right? And sort of understanding that fundamentally there has been an unequal relationship between the U.S. and the rest of the Americas, with U.S. holding much more of the wealth and opportunities here. And when you have this sort of system, right, it is not just, because folks one day decided that they were going to wake up and go. It's because life in their homeland often became untenable, right? Either by global climate, by war, by lots of other aspects that have linked the Americas to the U.S. situation. And so I think keeping that in mind, that these aren't just separate foreign countries, that these are countries whose, economic and political and social conditions are linked to the way the U.S. has also developed.
Returning back to the workplace, what are some ways that employees of this community may be excluded in their professional lives?
Yeah, one thing to think about is if you have this sense of not belonging and certain barriers, everything from, outdated migration laws to even the takeover of the U.S. Southwest, right? Even when we're talking, however historically you want to go, we see moments in which there are structures to social mobility, right? Barriers to social mobility. If we're just talking about the fact that if you look at California and if you look at where Latinx children are more likely to be in school, it's in the sort of schools that lack, proper resources, right? In under-resourced schools, right? So and this is not new. This is a continuous trend over time. All right. So if we understand that, then we can probably then guess that our ideas of who a professional is, our understandings of who is a computer programmer, who is a doctor, who is a dentist, who is a lawyer, are probably not going to include a sort of stereotype of Latinos, right? And so that's really hard. So what you'll see mainly in the workplace is when Latinos are in these professional settings, they're much more likely to be an extreme minority, right? And so thinking about that experience, what is it like to not be represented? What is it like to feel as you're the only one? What is it like to feel lonely in these places. And if workplaces can engage and think about how do we structure belonging for extreme minorities? How do we structure a sense of belonging for those for whom, are often not, seen as folks that belong here, folks that have a right to be here, folks that have earned, the opportunity where they are. And I think that's important. I think often we think of workplaces as just places of performance, places where we go in, we do our work, and we go home. But oftentimes, workplaces are places that give us value. They give us identity. They give us our friendship networks. They give us so much more than just the paycheck. What is it like then to have a place that can, be of value to us, but yet also not be completely inclusive of us? And I think understanding that, and when you really get that, that's when you can open up an honest and authentic conversation of how do we sort of extend the olive branch? How do we make these communities fully integrated into our organization?
We cannot ignore the past if we want to improve the present. We can't minimize the global in our attempt to address the local. Dr. Moore gave us some powerful examples of how a broader worldview can help us be even more inclusive inside of our organizations. And while that understanding requires work, the benefit to ourselves and to others is exponential. From there, we transition to the topic of access to opportunity. In organizations that strive for excellence, it's easy to get caught up in ideas of expertise and experience that show up in one particular way, in one particular form. For generations, many industries and institutions have only been open to some of us, and the way has been blocked for many others. Part of grappling with the privilege we each have is recognizing places where that privilege gave us access to opportunity that others simply didn't have. We must recognize that there were seen and unseen barriers for many, and our privilege may have acted as a key. Then we must take accountability for dismantling those barriers, instead of expecting others to overcome them. The fifth learning today is that removing barriers to opportunity isn't about lowering the bar. It is about unlocking the door for those who don't have the key. Charlotte McLean Inshapo, Global Disability Advisor for the World Bank Group, shines a light on how organizational and behavioral barriers can compound the experiences of exclusion for people with disabilities. She explores how microaggressions and stigma in the workplace can manifest and be experienced, and how we can all work to change them.
I just want to start off by saying we have to remember that experiences are very context specific. So my experience as a woman of color with a disability is very different from a cis white male with a disability or a rural woman with a disability who may not have an education. And then, of course, our experiences are further nuanced by the types of disabilities that we have. But let me offer a couple of examples of how people are excluded in the workplace. So one, I'll start off with structural barriers, and those could be physical or digital facilities, which may emerge as early as in the hiring process itself and may continue throughout the employment life cycle. And these may be structural barriers that exclude persons with disabilities. We know that companies often fail to consider the accessibility impacts of their hiring programs, including the emerging automated AI assistance to speed up the process of hiring. Then, of course, another way is organizational culture and attitudinal barriers that may exclude persons with disabilities. And this might look like employees with disabilities being overlooked because of extremely paternalistic and ableist behavior, or perceived to be part of a particular type of stereotype and not able to address particular aspects of work. And what's clear here is that these behaviors are rooted in hidden biases of employers, and they're very influential. Research tells us that supervisors' attitudes can make or break the employee's experience of inclusion in the workplace. And then lastly, I'll just say that there's also a social side to this. Our engagement in the workplace goes beyond just our desks. So we need to think about the connections that we make in the workplace, in the cafeteria, over coffee, or at the water filter, or in team building exercises, and continuously ask ourselves the question, are these spaces and fora accessible of all persons with disabilities?
What are some of the lesser known issues, and I'm thinking particularly around the issues of stigma and of stereotypes that show up in the workplace for people who have disabilities?
We know that everyone holds unconscious beliefs about various social and identity groups, and particularly to groups that we do not belong to. And these biases influence how we organize society, how we categorize people into groups, and often how we assign value to those groups. So acknowledging this is really, in my mind, the first step in confronting disability stigma. We know that conscious bias is almost always the root cause of overt discrimination, while unconscious bias shows up in forms of microaggressions, behavior that infantilizes staff with disabilities. We see subtle but often offensive comments like, "Oh, what you do is so challenging. I'm so amazed by how you manage." Jokes, actions that may be unintentional, but hurt the employee with a disability and unconsciously reinforce stereotypes. Or it could be that employees with disabilities are made to feel grateful or special that they have a job. And commonly we see that employees with disabilities are often pigeonholed into certain types of jobs. So for example, a desk job because you have a mobility disability. And then I think it's worth looking at the leadership of industry. And we really don't see many persons with disabilities on boards. We really see very little disability representation at that level. And so we have to think about the issues around low expectation of success of employees with disabilities. And this can lead to the redlining of positions, the lack of promotions of staff with disabilities, not offering them management positions or suite positions.
We must get beyond the illusion that ensuring equal access in any way lessens the quality of talent we hire or the leaders we develop. Charlotte calls on us to understand that our organizations excel and individuals thrive when everyone has access to opportunity. Microsoft has been on this journey for some time, and we know that examining how this might be true in our own companies is an important place to start. Thanks again for joining me today. We hope you check out the full videos from these great thought leaders and many more at aka.ms/inclusion journey.